Over the last 2 years, world shipping ran the hardest stress test in its modern history. The Suez corridor degraded, then the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed. Every incentive a shipping line could feel pointed in one direction, north, toward the alternative the map has promised for 20 years, the melting Arctic, the shortcut over the top of the world. And the Arctic's cargo went down, for the second year in a row. So the question we're going to sit with isn't the one everyone asks. It isn't when the ice finally opens. It's a stranger question, and a more useful one. What actually makes a stretch of water a route? Because a route is not water. And the Northern Sea route has the water, and almost nothing else. Let's put it on the map first. Trace the top of Russia, from the Barents Sea in the west to the Bering Strait in the east. That arc, roughly 3,000 nautical miles along the Siberian coast, is the Northern Sea route. On paper, it looks like a gift. It cuts the distance from Northeast Asia to Northern Europe by about a third against the long haul down through Suez. And distance, in shipping, is fuel and time and money. So for 2 decades, that single number has powered a very simple story. The ice is melting, the shortcut is opening, and the only argument left is the date. 2030, 2040, 2050, pick your melt curve, and the route is just a matter of waiting. Hold that story up against the actual geography, though, and something is missing. Along those 3,000 miles sits one major export terminal, a scattering of small Arctic settlements, and then a great deal of nothing. No deep-water salvage yards standing by. No dense chain of bunkering ports where a ship can refuel. No liner network calling weekly the way it does at Rotterdam or Singapore. Just coastline, cold water, and, for most of the year, ice. The map that sells the shortcut is a map of distance. The map that decides whether it's a route is a map of everything that isn't on that coastline. That gap between the promise and the coastline is the whole story. So let's be precise about what a route actually requires, because the word does a lot of quiet work. Think of it as a stack of 6 things. First, navigable water. You have to be able to physically get a hull through. Second, insurance. Someone has to underwrite that hull and its cargo against the risk, or it simply doesn't sail. No underwriter, no voyage. Third, ice-class tonnage, the specific reinforced ships that can take the ice, which are only a sliver of the world's fleet. Fourth, ports and salvage and search and rescue spread along the way, so that when something goes wrong 3,000 miles from anywhere, there is an answer other than silence. Fifth, schedule reliability. A shipping line sells departure dates and arrival dates, and a route it cannot schedule is a route it cannot sell. And sixth, a counterparty, someone you can lawfully, cleanly do business with to use the water at all. 6 links. Water is one of them. The melt, the thing the entire popular story turns on, supplies only that first link, and yes, increasingly so. But every other link, the route either lacks outright or borrows from a single supplier. And here is the part the melt curve debate keeps stepping over. A chain is not the sum of its links, it's the weakest one. You can have the water and still not have a route, the way you can have an open driveway and still not have a highway. Water is necessary, it is nowhere near sufficient. So watch the links fail in order. Start with the water itself, because even that is thinner than the melt maps suggest. In 2025, the reliable open water window, the stretch when a captain could count on moving without heavy ice, was no more than about 2 weeks. Late September into early October. That's it. The eastern leg, the East Siberian Sea, stayed the hardest passage of all, icebound through most of the season, with autumn ice this year forming earlier and harder than usual. The satellite image of a blue Arctic in high summer and the schedule a shipping line can actually bank on across a full year are 2 very different things. The ice melted is a fact. The route is open for business is a claim, and for most of the calendar it isn't. Next link, insurance, and the ships themselves. To transit that ice, you need Arc-class reinforced hulls, and for much of the season, a state icebreaker escort running ahead of you to open the way. Those hulls are a small fraction of the world's merchant fleet. Most ships simply cannot go, however attractive the shortcut looks on a distance chart. They are not built for ice, and no insurer will underwrite them into it. So even the vessels that could physically attempt the passage are a sliver of what floats, and each one depends on an escort that only one country supplies. Which brings us to the ports, or the absence of them. 3,000 nautical miles of coastline, and if a hull is holed or an engine fails out in the middle of it, there is no dense network of salvage tugs and repair yards and spare parts depots waiting to respond. The margin for error that a global shipping lane quietly depends on, the unspoken assumption that if something breaks, help exists and it isn't far, is, across most of this route, simply not there. Distance from rescue is itself a cost, and here it is enormous. And so schedule reliability collapses almost on its own. A 2-week dependable window, gated by icebreaker escort, thinly served by ports. You cannot build a weekly liner service on top of that. A shipping line's entire product is certainty, the promise that the box leaves Tuesday and arrives when it says. This route can't offer that promise, so it can't be sold as a route. It can only be used occasionally by those willing to take the risk, one voyage at a time. Which leaves the last link, the counterparty. And this is where the map stops being about ice at all. We can measure, precisely, how much of the whole world chose to use this route as a through corridor in 2025. The number is small enough to hold in your hand. 103 transit voyages, 88 vessels, about 3.2 million tons of transit cargo across the entire year. That is the sum total of the planet using the Arctic as a shortcut for 12 months. Not a busy week. A year. Now let me give that number a scale, because on its own, 3 million tons sounds like a lot. Before the Red Sea crisis, in its 2022 to 2023 financial year, the Suez Canal moved about 1.5 billion tons of cargo. That's the Canal Authority's own figure, and it was the highest in its history. Divide that across the hours in a year, and Suez, before the crisis, was moving roughly 170,000 tons of cargo every single hour. So take the melting Arctic route's entire year of transit cargo, all 3.2 million tons, the whole world's through traffic for the season, and set it against that hourly rate. It comes to about 18 hours, somewhere between 18 and 19 hours of pre-crisis Suez. A full year on the shortcut of the future is about 18 hours of an ordinary pre-crisis day on the route it is supposed to replace. Let that sit for a moment. Not 18 days. Not 18 weeks. 18 hours. The entire annual through traffic of the route, the world has been told, will replace Suez fits inside less than a single day of the Suez that existed before the crisis even started. One route moves in an afternoon what the other moves in a year. That is the distance between a route and water. And once you can see it, the rest of the picture snaps into focus, because if the world isn't using this route, someone is. Just not for world trade. Look at what actually moves on the Northern Sea route, and it is not global commerce. It is energy. About 83% of all traffic on the route is energy cargo. Liquefied natural gas at 58%, crude oil at 21%, gas condensate the remainder. This is not the world's containers of electronics and furniture and machine parts finding a faster path east and west. It is the hydrocarbons that fund the Russian state moving out to buyers. And it narrows further still. In 2025, a single terminal, Sabeta, the export port built for the Yamal liquefied natural gas project, handled more than 90% of the route's port turnover. More than 90%, through one point on a 3,000-mile map. Strip out that one terminal's gas, and almost nothing is left of the route at all. So look again at what this thing actually is. Not world infrastructure, not an emerging highway for global trade. It is one company's export corridor, Novatex Gas, leaving Novatex Terminal, with a national icebreaker fleet clearing the ice ahead of it, and a navy holding the water around it. A private driveway, one product, one seller, a handful of buyers. Open, yes, open the way a driveway is open, not the way a highway is. And that reframes the entire melt debate, because the real dependency here runs backward from the popular story. The world does not depend on this route, it demonstrably declines to use it. What actually depends on the route is narrow and internal. Yamal gas needs Sabeta, Sabeta needs the state icebreaker escort, and the whole chain needs Asian buyers at the far end. That is the dependency that genuinely exists, not the world leaning on the Arctic, one exporter leaning on its own corridor. There is one more piece of the counterparty problem worth naming plainly, because it sits underneath all of this. Russia treats the key straits along the route as its own internal waters, claiming the authority to permit transits, charge fees, and require notice from foreign vessels. The United States and others formally reject that reading and hold the straits to be international waters where freedom of navigation applies. We're not going to settle that dispute here. The point is only structural. The single counterparty who supplies the escort, the ports, and the permission also claims to own the water. For a shipping line weighing a route, that is not a footnote. It is the whole risk. Now, the honest counter-argument. Because 2025 was not all decline, and a careful look has to face the parts that point up. China's Arctic container voyages did set a record: 7 in 2023, 11 in 2024, 14 in 2025. One ship made the first direct China to UK Arctic container run in about 20 days. And looking ahead, the moves are bigger. A Chinese operator has lined up a scheduled weekly Arctic container service between China and Europe, with sailings planned across August to October of 2026. Russia's Rosatom has approved a design for a large Arctic-class container ship for a regular Russia-China line, roughly half-financed from the state budget, along with a proposed fee of about $1.50 per ton on the route from 2027 to help pay for it. And Russia has, once again, pledged year-round navigation for the coming season. A bull would say, the audition is only just beginning. Give it a few seasons and the numbers will come. Here is why the picture still holds, and why these moves, read closely, strengthen the case rather than weaken it. Look at what every one of those items has in common. A service that has to be launched, a container line that has to be state-designed and half-state financed, a fee proposed not to skim a thriving trade, but to fund the ships that don't exist yet. That is the tell. When you have to subsidize a route into existence, when the state proposes to charge a fee in order to build the very vessels that would generate the traffic, you are paying to manufacture demand, not discovering it. State cargo is not market adoption, and the base is tiny. That record container year, 14 voyages, 15 container transits in all, is, even at its record, a rounding error against the tens of thousands of liner sailings the world runs every year. Even the container tonnage itself is contested. The independent voyage-level estimate puts 2025 container cargo at around 287,000 tons, while the state operator claims about 400,000. Take even the higher number, the state's own claim. And it changes nothing about the scale because the whole year of transit still rounds to about 18 hours of Suez. Then the decisive fact, the one those showcase voyages have to answer to. With the single greatest incentive to flee to an alternative route in the modern history of shipping, Suez degraded, Hormuz closed, every ship in the world looking for another way through, total cargo on the northern sea route fell. Down 2.3%. The second straight annual decline. The showcase container runs happened and the aggregate still went down. If maximum pressure cannot lift the number, a press release will not. And the year-round navigation pledge? It has been made, in one form or another, since 2020. It has not arrived. A promise repeated for 5 years running and not delivered is not a forecast. It is a data point of its own, and it points the same way the tonnage does. So set the melt aside for a moment, because the melt was never the variable that decided this. The thing to watch was never the ice curve. It is the stack. Transit tonnage, not destination tonnage, across consecutive seasons. Whether any non-Russian carrier adopts the route on its own economics, with no subsidy underneath it. Whether the insurance and the ice-class ships ever pencil out without a state paying the difference. Those are the links that turn water into a route, and those are the ones to track. The calm reading of where this goes is straightforward, and it is not a doom story. The top of the world genuinely is opening. The melt is real, and it is not stopping. But opening water and opening a trade route are not the same event, and they are not on the same timeline. What the Arctic is becoming, first and for a long time to come, is a larger Russian energy corridor and a wider naval space, a bigger version of exactly what it already is, a trade route that the rest of the world actually schedules and ensures and depends on, is a much further and much less certain thing, if it arrives at all. The ice is melting. That part of the story was always true. But a route is not water. It is everything you have to build on top of the water. And on the Northern Sea route, almost all of it is still missing.